with the status bar to go live soon.
Oh man,
it's loading very
anticipation is killing me.
Yeah.
I'm ready now. All right.
Okay.
You're starting this right.
Welcome to Reimagining Retreats. I'm Dan Masterton. I'm here with Carrie White. We'd love for this to be an interactive session, so please feel free to use the chat function to talk with each other or to provide comments to us. If you have a question you'd like to be answered, put it in the Q&A tab instead of the chat so we don't get lost, and Carrie will keep an eye on the question for us. Today's session will be recorded, so you'll be able to go back and review the content for 30 days. If you'd like to connect with us after the session, you can find our info in the People tab of the Event Ed platform. If you have technical difficulties today, you can always try refreshing your page or clearing your browser history and logging back in. So right now, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our presentation on reimagining retreats. I'm Dan Masterton. I've been a Catholic high school campus minister for 7 years. I now work as a part-time pastoral minister with the men's religious community, and I'm a stay-at-home dad for my wife, Catherine, and my two daughters, Lucy and Cecilia. And I'd also like to introduce to you my friend, Carrie White. Carrie?
Hello, friends. I'm Carrie White. I'm the director of campus ministry here at St. Edward High School in Lakewood. We're an all-male 9 through 12 building. Brothers of the Congregation of the Holy Cross sponsors us. Congregation of Holy Cross, don't tell anybody I added that "the" in there. They'll beat me up. So I'm in charge primarily of retreats and prayer, help out with some service here with all of our students. I'm in my 10th school year here at St. Ed's. It's a little weird to think about. I grew up in Minnesota, so I worked in Catholic churches in a high school in Minnesota before I moved to the Cleveland area. And I'm about halfway through a doctorate in ministry program at our local graduate seminary, looking primarily at how to turn student leaders and train them as missionary disciples, more or less. So if that sounds like something fun and you want to read some research, I got a project for you. We did, Dan and I put together a little guide for campus ministry that NTEA published a little bit ago. That's what that lovely picture is, Cultivating Faith. It's a great little book. If you're interested in something like that, check it out. And Dan wrote a follow-up, which will be even better now, I think, next month. I don't know if he'll tell you all of that, but it's going to be really good. So I wanted to make sure it got in there. So we're really excited to just talk about some of the things that we've learned and thought about, especially regarding retreats over the last however many months we've been in school. It feels like I've been in school for a long time. We've been fully in person all year. That's probably important to note here. But we do have at St. Ed's an option for students to be remote, essentially on a daily basis. We don't consider that hybrid. We would consider us fully in person, but if a kid is quarantining, the teachers are streaming their classrooms, so he still has access to his education. We found our kids actually, for the most part, do not like having to be online. They'd rather be here if they can. So I'd say 90% of our students are in the building every day. It sounds like I'm having a little bit of a sound issue, which this computer has been doing. So I'm going to let Dan take it away and see if I can figure this out.
Thanks, Carrie. To get started, just thought we'd talk about what are some foundational pillars of retreats, regardless of whether we're talking about the before times or pandemic times, whether we're talking about holding retreats in person, kind of in a conventional retreat center setting, or some of our adaptations now. Just kind of resetting ourselves on what these foundational pillars are that should make up all good retreats. So first, I always like to say a retreat is signified by time, space, and context. There needs to be significant time dedicated towards these explorations. There needs to be a space made that is intentionally distinct from what's part of everyday life and everyday routine. and there needs to be a context created that is also distinct. So it can't just feel like another class within a high school day schedule. It can't just feel like another trip to the chapel or another daily mass. Those things can surely be components of a good retreat, but some sort of context should be created that distinguishes it from other everyday life or kind of conventional routine experiences. Within that, you have to create a safe, welcoming, supportive environment where students feel that they can trust one another, that their leaders are encouraging and inviting them to participate in things that will be safe and beneficial for them, and where who they are and what they have to share is welcomed. One of the ways that I like to try to extend this is to tell students that retreats are inspired and informed by Catholic tradition and Catholic practice, but are open and accessible and beneficial to students of other Christian faith traditions, other faith traditions outside Christianity, and even those students who maybe don't come from any faith tradition in particular. That said, a retreat should have a spiritual purpose. We should be talking about something more than a trip to the bowling alley or a 15-minute reflection and a pizza lunch. We want to try to have a specific personal space for students to do some prayer and reflection for themselves with God, and a definite space for communal spirituality where students are sharing with others and listening to others and experiencing their faith in community with one another. As you're building the content for that, retreats should be informed by scripture and tradition. It doesn't mean that every activity has to have a scripture passage worked in or a traditional piety or devotion incorporated, but the objectives and outcomes of your retreat and the intentions you have for what you want students to explore and come away with should have connections to things that we read and learn from scripture and things that we practice in our Catholic faith tradition. Building on that, you need to have a place for faith sharing. So retreats shouldn't be all just input from speakers and those who have prepared remarks or reflections. There should also be a place where students can process and externalize in small groups and in large groups. And faith sharing ought to be more than just some sort of kind of lunchroom or hallway chit chat. It should be a place where connections are drawn to students' faith, students' relationship with God, their ability or inability or their successes or struggles in identifying God's presence and love moving in their lives. Faith sharing should be something that's a little bit more, a little bit deeper than an everyday conversation. And then finally, retreats should be part of a larger campus ministry network. I usually describe campus ministry in a high school setting as retreats, liturgy and prayer, and service and justice. So ideally, a retreat is kind of a milestone, seminal experience that students have together, but it's one that's part of this larger framework where that life of faith across their 4 years is interwoven with regular all-school liturgies, with daily prayer, and it also has an opportunity to be deepened by their experience working alongside people who are marginalized or building relationships with people through service opportunities and hopefully service learning. And then even broader than that, ideally, it's part of something that's more integrated with theology curriculum and hopefully a broader school strategic plan. But kind of at a minimum, it needs to be part of a retreats, liturgy and prayer, service and justice framework where students are experiencing something that reaches a little bit wider than just that retreat experience. So kind of transitioning into what we want to suggest for reimagining your retreats, I want to start by just acknowledging that the COVID-19 pandemic time is both a time of frustration and a time of opportunity. Personally, the way I like to describe it is that I'm definitely an idealist. I think pretty highly of retreats and what they can do in terms of deepening and broadening young people's faith and the inflection it can have in pointing the futures of their lives toward a deeper faith life and a stronger relationship with God. So I will be one of the strongest advocates and proponents for good retreat budgets, the importance of retreats in a school calendar, in teacher contracts in terms of supervisions and ways that teachers are expected to involve themselves in the broader activity of the school community. But I'm also a pragmatist, and I realize that at certain points you do have to make adaptations and compromises and try to find ways to make things work when you have restricted parameters or things that prevent you from doing the full thing that you intended to do. So as much as I love good retreat centers, I love the way that you can have a self-contained environment, the way that you can have faith sharing opportunities in these special small group breakout rooms and then in large group share outs. It's probably not something that we can do in most places, in most cases, quite yet. But since I do love practical, constructive solutions, I do love ways that you can use to get past frustration and try to figure out how do you respond to this. So then the question becomes, how can you hang on to your ideals, things like those pillars of a good retreat, and still practice them within the restrictions we have in order to keep our young people and our faculties and staff safe. So that's where the juggle kind of comes in. And one of the ways we wanted to approach this is by trying to figure out what are the core questions that you're asking and trying to answer as you plan and implement your retreats. So Carrie will give your audio another shot to tackle like what are the essential elements of retreats.
We're gonna try. This doesn't work. I don't know if this is better or worse. I got one more solution, but it's in a different room. So one thing I would say, we've been thinking a lot about our retreats here, and just this was really an opportunity for us to reevaluate like what the essential elements are retreats. What are we really ideally at the core wanting to have happen for our students, and then how do we kind of decide what's most important? So for me and for us here, I think the key, this is really what we tell and what our students would, I think, provide whenever they're giving feedback. They're always talking about the relationships that they have a chance to build is really important to them. So what's the most effective way to foster that? How do we provide students to be able to build these relationships, right? So for me, it's really important here to give kids an opportunity to talk to each other, to share stories, to give them a format where they can share meaningful experiences in a way that makes sense with the overall themes and things, and especially giving the older kids, the upperclassmen, an opportunity to kind of lead with the underclassmen and share their stories, especially with freshmen who are just, this is a weird year anyway. So I've found our freshmen have really benefited from having seniors, juniors, and seniors around, just to be able to tell them about things that they experienced their freshman year, but also like that this is a different year and things will get better. No, better is not the right word, but we'll go back to some different kinds of more normal experiences maybe. I think time for prayer and reflection, and what does that prayer have to look like? I think I've found a little bit that this environment of having to be distanced and different things has been working really well for reflective, individual, meditative kinds of prayer, and our students are really kind of latching onto that. And then we really want to be able to take them outside of the regular activities, which has been the hardest thing, I think, this year, like just trying to create a space where they're away from things that are going on that they would have every day, and then times to share with each other, and times to have fun. And what does all that look like and mean, and how can we do that? We can't touch each other and we're not hugging, although my boys aren't super big into hugging all the time anyway, but how can we still show that we're supporting each other and stuff within this environment that we're in? So I think we've really benefited from having the opportunity to kind of think about how to attack those things in different new kinds of ways, but really focusing in on those keys, right, of building relationships, taking time for prayer, stepping outside of our regular activities, having time to share in large and small groups, and then being in an environment that doesn't feel so much like school. So what are some tools to help us do that? Dan's gonna start with that.
Yeah, so how do we adapt for a virtual experience? One of the first things I would say, I'm pretty protective of the label retreat. Um, I've been like scarred by stories of people talking about like taking kids to a parish basement for a pastor to talk for an hour and then bringing them to a bowling alley and calling that a retreat. Um, if something is lighter and feels like it's being adapted really significantly, call it something different, and that's okay. I would often use the titles like morning of reflection or afternoon of reflection. With young adult ministry, I would often just use the word gathering. Sometimes softening the language can kind of match the experience better, and words do matter. So how we label things can have a little bit of an impact. Um, as far as virtual experience goes, I think one of the first things I would recommend is just admit that there are some serious shortcomings, and that's kind of just okay. I found working with teenagers and young adults in the last year or so that you just run into a lot of tricky problems that there isn't necessarily a solution to. A lot of teenagers like to leave their videos muted, and there's not necessarily anything you can do to force them to turn it on. Um, in retreats, I often talk about like having no opt-out activities where there's very low bars, very low expectations, and a really easy way to plug in and engage in the activity. In remote situations, it's really easy for a kid sitting in his own bedroom with the door closed and no one watching over him to just opt out, to just mute himself and or herself and not plug in. It can also be hard to set a good tone because you don't necessarily have a way to um, significantly and closely engage the people who are participating. Um, I would say don't necessarily punt completely. Don't necessarily give up on any sense of solemnity or seriousness or any sort of significant activity, but allow some realism. Don't be too hard on yourself over what you're going to do and how you're going to try to do it. The other thing I would say is sometimes in in-person retreats, students are just itching and itching for everything to be so interactive. Lots of up and moving, lots of back and forth dialogue, discussion, and just interactive. In a virtual experience, you might just decide this is a time I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to do a little bit more passive content. So that might mean you offer more windows to people who can prepare short talks, maybe not 30 minutes, maybe 5-10 minutes. Maybe there are more times where you ask students to take a few minutes to reflect themselves on certain key questions, or you challenge them to write in a journal or in a Word document or note about some questions. But maybe this is a chance to take a risk on some more passive content where you can prepare a speaker or certain prompts more thoughtfully and then kind of put it in the hands of the participants to engage well. Within that, though, there are some ways you can try to maximize the format to get as much out of it as you can. I've heard some positive feedback about peer empowerment. So rather than muting everyone and having a really forward facilitator be calling on people and unmuting people one by one, some people really prefer, like, even if it's a little bit clumsy, even if it's a little bit of a free-for-all, to take some of those controls down a little bit and try to be a little bit more organic. Young people have told us that that makes it feel a little bit more natural, a little less cold and sterile. So you might attempt some peer empowerment, like maybe a facilitator calling on a first person to share in a discussion or in response to a prompt or activity, and then having that person kind of like popcorn to a second person or invite a friend to follow them and share next. We definitely have tried to do very short sessions when we're working with the teens and young adults. On a retreat, you might have a discussion go 30, 45, even 60 minutes. Probably better in these situations to trim that down and have tighter, more specific questions and a smaller ask in terms of what they're going to talk about in discussions and how long you're going to give them. If it seems like you're rushing through it or you're not spending enough time on something, add a large group share out where each group has a leader or representative bring back one item to the large group that their small group talked about. And that can be a way to do another layer of processing that uses the time differently than just putting it all on a breakout group to use for discussion. One thing I definitely encourage, try to find like a surprise guest. Is there a priest who used to be in your community who has moved away or been reassigned, who students or young people still love and want to hear from? Could you maybe get them to pop into the Zoom or record a message? Is there a particular alumni or teacher or staff member who students love and maybe haven't seen or heard from in a while? same sort of thing. Could they pop in? Could they record something? See if you can throw a little bit of a curveball and plug something fun into a spot where maybe students are expecting something more predictable. When people are trying to be a little more low key, maybe staying muted, maybe turning off their video, see if you can use visuals to get them going. Have students use dry erase boards or notepads to respond to questions, maybe questions that could be answered with a number 1 to 10 or one word or phrase. You could do in-house scavenger hunts. You could say, I need everyone to go and find one item that represents our faith community. And they have to go to a t-shirt drawer or a wall of picture frames or a photo book and go grab something. You could also try doing visual polls. So tell everyone to put their video platform to gallery view and just ask questions that could be answered with thumbs up, thumbs down, I don't know. And then without saying anything or doing anything, you can just look at the gallery view of all participants. And you kind of get an answer in that way. Last thing I would say is don't be afraid of using your breakout rooms. Gallery view is a nice option for some things, and for larger group things, it helps to be able to have a quick thumbnail of everybody. But there are times where you're going to benefit from trying to have smaller, more focused discussions where people have fewer sets of eyes on them and a smaller group to share with. And those breakout times might be the place where some people feel most comfortable. The only thing I'd say is make sure you're safe. If you're working with minors, make sure you have enough adults to distribute, or make sure at minimum that adults are popping into breakout rooms to check in and keep an eye on things. If your diocese or religious community has established standards around virtual and remote gatherings, it'd be good to check in on those and make sure that you're following the best practices of people in your area. The other way that you can adapt things is if you're in a hybrid or an in-person setting, there are ways that you can use that to lean into this too. So Carrie's experience at St. Ed's will help us with that one.
Maybe I can unmute myself. So one thing we were working on here is just thinking about, usually we take our freshmen in groups of about 50 and we take them off campus for the day, but we're not obviously transporting students this year with our regulations in Ohio, and there's just really no space that could accommodate that safely. So the theology teachers and I essentially decided we were going to design 4 60-minute sessions. So we took the 4 main themes of our freshman retreat, focuses on our school's pillars. So we were looking at relationship, excellence, and servant leadership are the 4 areas we talk about at our school a lot. So we're looking at, can we use classrooms for breakout sessions? Can we spread everybody out enough in the gym or the cafeteria? And we had to do it during our regular school day, right? So what does that mean as everybody else is having, where are we breaking the kids out of this? And then just how do you use different spaces, right? So we ended up determining that what made the most sense for us was to take their 60-minute theology class period, and over the course of a week, we would do these 4 different sessions. So we ended up doing each session 7 times over the course of a day and a half. Our schedule rotates, so they take 6 classes in a day, and then they start with the class they didn't get to the next day. So we did each one 7 times in a row. There was a lot of retreat time and a lot of class time. We did the last week of the second quarter. But it worked out. We ended up using our chapel because it was big enough to space the kids out, and we did a lot of kind of individual things. So we ended up utilizing really reflective prayer time with the kids. They were doing Lectio Divina. We started each one with a particular scripture passage, and we use it at the beginning and the end as kind of a focus. Some small group activities, some different things, and we found we liked some of this stuff even better than what we had been doing as a way to teach, to kind of reflect on these concepts on the regular day-long retreat. And the kids appreciated kind of the opportunity to step out of their regular theology class life, really the regular school day, and kind of do something a little bit different in the chapel. And that worked really well for us. We've talked about, right, and are there other spaces that we could use reading years? And we're looking at, because it's later in the year, can we go outside and be outside at a park where maybe it's a little bit easier with the masks and we can spread them out. We're pretty close to Lake Erie here, so can we do some stuff down at the park that overlooks the lake is something we're really thinking about a lot, right? And that just as a way to kind of utilize what's around us, right? So I think the single class period has worked pretty well for us, but there's other ways, right? We've found I've kind of become an expert in streaming things. We've been streaming, especially our all school liturgies. So could parts of things be streamed to different places and then stuff is brought over there, right? Like communion time, we deploy the Eucharistic ministers and away they go to all corners of the building, which kind of turned our whole school into a church for that hour. That's what I told the kids when we were first starting. And I think that's something to consider too. Like if we have to spread out to do some of these things, does it allow us to think about our space in a new way? Which is what we've talked about, hosting a Kairos retreat in our school, because it's easier for kids to be able to have their own sleeping space is really important. So they don't necessarily have to wear a mask while they're sleeping. This makes it easier for breathing while sleeping. So like if we can do that here, is that also an opportunity for kids to think about our space a little bit differently? I think is an unexpected kind of bonus that we've been thrown around. So with all that, it's just kind of been a way we've been thinking about how to bring it all in together, right, in these different places. And I never would have really thought about having a retreat space be part of our gym in the same way, or outside front lawn, or even the football field. Like there's different things we could do back there other than play football, although the kids don't always believe me. But we're trying, you know, and I think this is a way to help them think about that stuff a little bit. And we're going to keep the Lexio, and we're going to keep, I think, even some of the activities that we put in with the freshmen. And some of these things might be applicable in different plans within the things that we do with students, right? Some of this stuff may work for freshman orientation in a way that we hadn't thought of before. So I think those are unexpected bonuses that can be helpful as well. And I think there's, obviously, as we're thinking about ways to innovate here, ways to use technology that can be an asset as well, right? So are there ways to intentionally incorporate different sources and voices? And a lot of these things I learned from my friends Liza and Ruth, who have been doing a lot especially in this conference. But like, can we pull in videos from religious congregation, from people, our students here, some of our teachers are pretty obsessed with Father Mike Schmitz from my friends in Duluth, right? My fellow homeland in Minnesota, who makes a ton of different catechetical videos that are about 5 to 10 minutes long. Ascension publishes those, right? That can come and speak, or if there's a friend or a former teacher, to even record some of that stuff. We had with our freshmen, because we were doing 7 retreats in a row over 4 days, usually the kids, the upperclassmen, will come and help lead a day-long retreat, but I told them they could not miss 4 full days of classes in a row to help facilitate these freshman retreats. So we had 4 seniors record a brief video talking about their experiences with the different pillars. So we had a student record a video talking about his experiences in faith, and a student record talking about servant leadership, and we did another one for excellence or whatever it was, because those kids weren't going to be able to be at all 7 retreats, but the students were able to hear, not only, so they were able to hear the same message at each session, but they were able to hear from different students. And occasionally, and then on the retreats those kids did lead, the students were like, oh, we saw you yesterday. And it worked out really well to be able to do that. And it helped with consistency too, I think. And then there's a lot of different websites out there that you can get polls on and stuff. Mentimeter is probably my favorite because you can do it. I like the word clouds because it gives you feedback in real time and you kind of see the most popular answer, and then you can save those, which is really useful. And Liza taught me about that one. So, you know, when you hang out with the smart people and then you just steal their ideas and absorb them. I think that really works, right? Things like Kahoot, students are pretty familiar with. There's a lot of different ways to, and especially if you can get older kids to kind of help create some of these things. I found some of our students really love to make Kahoot games. They think it's entertaining. So if there's ways to like incorporate older students that way, I think can be helpful too, because they're probably, at least our kids here, are not able to lead retreats in the way we've been used to. So I've been trying to find other ways to help them like still be connected with the kind of environment that we're in, right? Or sometimes we'll play things like Lamentations or Taylor Swift. So you have to decide if the quote is from the Book of Lamentations or a Taylor Swift song, which is wildly entertaining. I'm about 50-50, but there's a lot of versions out there, right? Kanye or Proverb is another one I think that's popular. And you can get these, a lot of youth ministry sites create these things. Project YM is usually where I pull them. It's a Catholic youth ministry group that supports youth ministers. They're really good. But there's a lot of different places out there on Google, or challenges the students to make one themselves, right? I think we're going to do that. I'm going to have them do like Deuteronomy or a kitchen appliance or something. I don't know. There's some weird things in there, right? So like stuff like that, I think can help as like a little bit of a break, a way to change it up a little bit, but also to kind of keep kids engaged, right? I know Dan has some good stories and uses humor a lot, really effectively as well.
Yeah, quick plug for, don't be afraid to use something that's funny as long as it's appropriate, and then make the bridge with your kind of reflection. Also, like Carrie said, sometimes the kids, if you can catch them in the right moment of ambition, will be happy to make something. We had a group of young adults facilitate an experience for teenagers online, and to introduce Lectio, they came up with a 5-minute skit recorded entirely by Zoom and then edited by them, where they were making fun of one of our religious brothers because the only Bible he had, jokingly, was a Bible he had received from an indigenous person when he served in Belize that was not in a language anyone understood. But they facilitated a skit where essentially it was passed like Brady Bunch style from square to square. And it was so funny. And I never would have come up with it, but we gave them the space and they did it and we showed it and it killed. So if you have space for something like that, or you have an ambitious person who you think you can give some rope to try it, it can have a big payoff for sure.
Right, and I think too, right, incorporating some of those things that kids are already using. So can they create a short TikTok video? And TikTok's all the rage right now. I don't try any of those dances, they're ridiculous, but right, like, can they create a TikTok video sharing a prayer or a scripture passage somehow, right? Like, we always encourage students to follow Pope Francis and different people on Twitter, and can they even run youth ministry or campus ministry Twitter accounts, right? Like this, and our student ministers this year created a student ministry Twitter account, and they created one to kind of share our Holy Cross heritage as well. And I have access to those, so I can see what they're posting and get rid of it quickly if I need to. But our students seem to understand well that this is an important responsibility, that they're representing our school. And it's a way for them to kind of share what they're doing, but also our Holy Cross guys have especially been sharing things about Lent in really thoughtful ways. And they're just creating all of that content themselves, giving them the space to do that. Or can there be like a pass it on challenge, right, where students create some sort of content about their faith or sharing a faith experience, and then challenge 3 people to follow them or to do the same, right? We asked our freshmen, when we were talking about faith, to think about somebody who had inspired their faith or shown faith to them or been an example of faith, and we asked them to create a video or write a letter. I was trying to get them to do TikTok things, but they were like not quite understanding how to translate that. But so they created this stuff and then sent it. We were encouraging them to share that with the person that they were writing about as a way to kind of say, to acknowledge these people who have helped to form them in their lives. And it was a really interesting activity to see the kids kind of think about who has helped to form them in particular ways. So can they, right, express some of that and then invite others to do the same, was something that we were thinking about. So just, and those, there are probably there's many other ways to incorporate this, and I'm sure a lot of you are doing a lot of those things. They're just some things that we were thinking about and stuff that I've tried, especially in the last couple months with our students here. So with that, I think there's just a couple closing thoughts, and I know there's some questions too that we'll get to because they're really good ones.
Yeah, so just kind of a way to wrap up. One of the things that was cool talking with Carrie about preparing this presentation and then talking with priests and lay ministers across the parishes and school that the religious congregation I work for cover. There's definitely a lot of like frustration and challenge with like how little we're able to do and how constrained we are to keep one another safe. But there's kind of a silver lining to me that if we do things well and we try to be creative and we try to be optimistic and keep our heads up now, there's this sort of neat dual purpose that we're serving. If we can do our best now and we're faithful and earnest, we're filling a need in this moment in the present for the people who we're walking with during the pandemic. But then the cool thing too is if we're doing this right and we're trying to still be creative and invest ourselves, chances are some of the things that we're creating and leading now are going to remain impactful and usable and might even refresh and improve our ministry after things can go back more to how they were before. So we can both fill a need that's really pressing and urgent right now, and we can also give ourselves things that we can carry forward that hopefully will make a positive impact and improve the things we do after things kind of calm back down. Carrie, you want to?
Yeah, and I would say too, don't be afraid to keep, right, some of those things that you find that you work, that you like. Like I mentioned, the stuff that we're doing on the freshman retreat, like the Lectio and some of those different things we're going to keep, and I'm probably going to incorporate it into different other retreats, especially that we're doing. And I'm finding our students are incorporating it into different ways that they're praying and stuff too, even leading their friends in Lectio experiences. So that was probably something I wasn't expecting necessarily to land on, and to decide that we like it better. So that's been really fun. And then just in terms of further connecting, I would really encourage everybody. There's a Facebook group for high school campus ministers and theology teachers. If you just go into Facebook and you look up NFCYM Campus Ministry Network, NFCYM Ministry Network for high school campus ministers and religion teachers, you'll find us in there. There's some questions we ask you to answer just about where you're ministering at, just as a way to verify. And then on Facebook, there is a group chat pretty much every Saturday morning, the Catholic Ed Chat. That's where I've met a lot of these people, right? And actually, I think they had a lounge chat happening earlier this morning, making a tree at Stage Crew, so I couldn't pop in there. But they're a great group. I've learned so much from those guys on Twitter. It's unbelievable. So that's at 9 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast. And then whatever that is for you, wherever you are. And you can check that out later as well. I would say just before we go, there's a really good question, just thinking about like what's the balance between being present to lead every retreat ever or to let somebody else, you know, if there's colleagues or people to be a part of that and like pop in, or what's the balance between seeing students and like with in and out a little bit, right, versus your role. I say for me, I'm not like you, Nick. I prefer to do the freshman retreats, especially as a way to meet them. And then, but it's impossible for me to do the freshman retreats and the sophomore retreats, probably because they happen sometimes at the same time. But I'll try and jump in and say hi to students when I can, and then try and grab the older retreats. I do the junior retreats as well, because it's a way, really another way for me to connect with students for a more extended time since I'm not in the classroom. But it took me a little bit to realize like it's okay that I'm not on every retreat, because it's just not sustainable for me. It's probably not super healthy, and it's just really hard to do all of that. We have 900 boys, so it's a lot of time running in and around. And I think, so I try and see the kids in other ways too, right? At different activities they're doing or different things. I've been standing in the hallway in between classes as a way to remind myself to move, and I can say hi to them as they go by as well. I would think, I don't know, Dan, if you want to add or if anybody had anything to add
as far
to
as that goes, don't feel like you have to direct every retreat, but I think, yeah, the younger students, if you can be more present and more introducing yourself and meeting more of them, that's great. And then with the middle or older stuff, if you can't do every one, maybe be really involved in the leadership application and selection or in the leadership formation, even if you're not directing the retreat. Maybe you can pop out to the retreat and help with the opening remarks and welcome, or be a part of the conclusion, or maybe you can join a prayer service to provide a reflection. I think you can always find a way to be present, but also kind of meter yourself out so that you're not overstretched.
Yeah, and then there's a second question in here talking about a full school day or condensed within the retreat, and some pros and cons for each. I think for us in this COVID, it's really hard for us to do a full school day, probably because the space limitations in our building. We just don't really have that all the time, and logistics of feeding students in COVID with everything being, for here at least, our practice is still everything's individually wrapped and what all that kind of stuff. Just logistically is really hard. So I've been avoiding like meal times, having retreats over meals, just because it's complicated to figure all that out. And so I think it can be done, and especially for like some of the more impactful Kairos retreats, is worth an attempt in a smaller group. It's just, it can be like managing all those logistics. We did do an overnight out of the building Kairos retreat in November, where the kids had individual sleeping rooms and they made all the food, and that worked pretty well. But it was a little bit challenging at times, in terms of just having everybody spaced out when we were doing confessions and different things. But I think it was a meaningful experience. In that way, I wouldn't attempt that for larger groups of more than 25. That's just my own personal opinion. And if we were going to do a full day retreat, we'd probably do it when there wasn't school, so that we're not trying to contend with everything else happening here in the building. I think those are just kind of some of the things that I've noticed.
Anecdotally, I've heard of people attempting full day or multiple full days, it seems to only really work if your school is hybrid or remote because of space constraints. So if you have the space because students are only partially or not in the building, you have more space to spread out and create multiple breakout rooms and meeting spaces and a safe eating environment. But in the midst of a full in-person school setup, I think, yeah, Carrie's right that the logistical constraints just become like almost too daunting to navigate unless you're using a spring break or summer or a weekend, in which case you start to run into challenges with getting proper adults involved and contract time. And so you just kind of have to pick your battle and decide how you want to tackle it. Definite pros and cons, go ahead to say it. One more question, or are we good?
Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Is there one more question, or should we wrap it up?
I think right at the time, those were pretty much all the questions in the chat or in the question box and in the chats. I know Liza's mentioning, right, it's pretty easy to pack content into 2 hours that we are used to taking much longer than that, right? Which is probably a good thing, but it's hard. We found too, it's hard for our students to focus online for much more than an hour or two. So that's important as well. But yeah, I think we're right at the time. So, right, I think 3:15 was the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you all for being with us today. Hopefully, Dan's always full of the helpful ideas. So please feel free to contact us at any time. Love to talk about this stuff all day long. So it was great to be with you all.
Tag us on Twitter or send us a DM, and we'd be glad to hear from you and engage with you a little bit. And then if you're interested in more kind of retreat nitty gritty, my book from NCA comes out next month. Should be in early April, and I'll tweet about it when it's available. But thank you very much for joining us, and just remember that there's more conference later today. This is the last day of the and the next program I think starts at 2:30. So hang around and jump back on.